Robin Currey, and I'm the director of the Master of Science in Sustainable Food Systems program, which is an intentionally online program and has been since inception that seeks to support students in their efforts to build more sustainable food systems in their own communities. College towns seem to collect a disproportionate number of academic activists, but our hometowns need our students as they are applying what they're learning in the classroom to improve their food systems. And even though it's nearly the end of the school year for most schools, we still invite teachers to incorporate this series into their classroom structure for their now online students. Our motivation for starting this webinar series was that we know that there are families all over the country and all over the planet encountering situations where they cannot find the kinds of foods they're used to in the amounts that they are used to. The spotlight is on food supply chains, and clearly many of our existing food systems are not equitably ensuring food for all, even in the best of times. For those of you who are less familiar, a food system encompasses all of the stages of keeping us nourished. This is growing, harvesting, packing, processing, transforming, marketing, consuming, and hopefully not too much disposal of food. At Prescott College, we're avid advocates for sustainable diets, and these are diets with low environmental impacts that can play an important role in ensuring food and nutrition security. As a faculty, we're thinking about increased vulnerability to food insecurity that has happened as a result of isolation measures associated with the COVID-19 virus. This shows us more now than ever that we have important work to do to ensure safe, resilient food systems. But how do we get it right? The Food Systems Fridays series for the new future will focus on policies, practices, and people, such as those who have joined us for our panel today, who can show us and help us learn about models of sustainable food systems and communities. We are running this series live every 2 weeks now. So I hope that you will come join us next time on June 5th. We'll be airing at exactly the same time. So please stay tuned for details. If you registered for the webinar, you'll receive an email invitation automatically about the details for the next webinar in your inbox. So you're also welcome to keep an eye on the Food Systems Friday website. I'll share the link in the chat. And also we have an associated podcast. So we have a podcast called The Capstone that you may be interested in listening into also. I'll share the link for that too. Now, a couple of our Zoom logistics. So we're all becoming pros, but this format of Zoom is a webinar format. So you may notice that, your video is not on, nor is your audio. And that's just to make sure that the panel discussion goes smoothly, but we welcome your questions and your participation in the chat. So if you will hover your mouse, usually it's listed at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a bubble and it says chat on it. So I would like to invite all of you to please introduce yourself in that chat area, because then we will know who is participating in the webinar, and we hope that this will also be considered a learning community where you can be learning from each other and your own experiences in the food systems. So also, if you have questions for the panelists while we are underway, you have two options. One option is you can go ahead and write your question in another one of those little bubble boxes at the bottom of the Zoom. You'll see it says Q&A, or you're welcome to put your question in chat, and we'll be monitoring that to make sure that the questions get directed to our panelists. The other thing is that we want to make sure that you are aware that we make this webinar available for those who aren't free right at noon Pacific time. So we do record this, so just please be aware that your comments in chat will be noted, and any of your questions that we pose to the panelists will also be recorded. And so I think that takes care of our logistical details. If you have further questions, please feel free to put them in chat. As I noted, my name is Robin Currey, and I am the director of the Sustainable Food Systems program at Prescott College. I'm an ethnoecologist, which is a study of how people make decisions about natural resources management, and I specialize in agrobiodiversity. So how do people make decisions about which food plants they want to have in their gardens and smallholder agricultural systems. This webinar, like I said, is really focused on trying to get ideas about how to get food system sustainability right. Not just in the short term, but we need to be addressing food insecurity and food system sustainability in the long term. To do this, we have to look at the very foundations of sustainable food systems, and true cost accounting reframes our thinking about the environmental, social, and financial impacts of our decision-making and policies in the food and agriculture arena. The theme here is on transforming food systems for the long term. So this is a conversation about true cost accounting, what COVID-related food system issues have come to our attention recently, and how to get true cost accounting to be taken up in policy post-COVID. So our panelists, we're joined today by Paula Daniels. Paula is co-founder and chair of the Center for Good Food Purchasing, which is a social enterprise nonprofit founded in 2015 as a spinoff from the Los Angeles Food Policy Council, which Paula also founded. The Center for Good Food Purchasing uses the power of procurement to create a transparent and equitable food system that prioritizes the health and well-being of people, animals, and the environment. And they do this through a nationally networked adoption and implementation of good food purchasing program by large institutions. There are numerous institutions in cities across the US enrolled in the program. She is a lawyer and public policy leader in environmental food and water policy with extensive experience in developing and leading local, state, national environmental initiatives that include government, civil society, and private sector partners. Welcome, Paula.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We're joined by Tim Wise also. Tim is a senior researcher at the Small Planet Institute, where he directs the Land and Food Rights program. He is also a senior researcher, a senior research fellow at Tufts University's Global Development and Environment Institute. It was there that he founded and directed its Globalization and Sustainable Development program. He previously served as executive director to the US-based aid agency, Grassroots International, and he is the author of Eating Tomorrow, Agribusiness, Family Farmers, and the Battle for the Future of Food, recently released, and Confronting Globalization, Economic Integration and Popular Resistance in Mexico. Our final panelist today is Dr. Barbara Gemmill-Herren, and she is one of the world's foremost authorities on pollination ecology and pollination services, which actually has everything to do with true cost accounting. Barbara is associate faculty at Prescott College, teaching courses on food systems, biodiversity, ecosystem services, and agriculture and advanced food policy. She's also a senior associate to the World Agroforestry Center, supporting the UN's work, the United Nations work on agroecology and true cost accounting in agriculture. She was delivery manager for the major area work on ecosystem services and biodiversity for the Food and Agriculture organization at the UN. And so welcome to all of you. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm going to hand the mic over to Barbara. So please take it from here. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry that my picture doesn't show up, because I would like to be able to smile at all of you and have that personal touch, but I'm out in the country with low bandwidth and I think it's just not working right now. So what I wanted to do, I had proposed this topic to Robin and she was very enthusiastic about it, but I think we need to be sure that people do understand what we're talking about. So I just wanted to give a brief sort of summary of what true cost accounting is. I think it has somewhat of an unfortunate name. It's not sort of the remit of accountants. It's much broader than that. So let me try to convey that. I have just a few slides that I'll bring into this, but just as a prelude, just to say that, really never, I think most of you are aware that never in the history of the world have we ever produced as much food as we do produce now. But at the same time, we've never had farming systems that are causing so much environmental pollution, pandemics, in a sense, of diet-related diseases, and tremendous impacts on the world's biodiversity. And we cannot say that we just must tolerate these negative impacts of agriculture because we have so many mouths to feed. I mean, that argument is brought up often enough, but if I just go into sharing my screen right now and go into my first slide. No, I wanted to go. Yeah, this is from a very recent presentation by colleagues at University of Maryland, but very nice recent statistics of the amount of nitrogen pollution that our farming systems are producing, and at the same time, increases in both moderate food insecurity and severe food insecurity. So to the contrary, the number of hungry in the world is on the rise amidst growing inequity. So it's tempting to say that the world food system is broken. It's certainly failing to deliver healthy and sustainable food for all. And we could argue it that the prevailing food systems based on a highly integrated global supply chains are far from broken, actually. Maybe they're delivering what they're intended to do, which is structured, designed, and incentivized to produce, over-processed food products with low nutritional value and to externalize the cost of producing this kind of food, to consolidate supply chains that make farmers price takers, having very little ability to negotiate for fair prices, accept whatever prices they can get and unable to influence these prices, and in so doing, to maximize corporate profit. You might say that's just the way the market economy works, but agriculture and the food industry really stands out in terms of its capacity to generate costs outside of what we pay for food. And I found this a really interesting study on the part of KPMG, the highly respected accounting firm. They began to look at the amount of negative externalities produced by different sectors of the economy. And of course, there can be large numbers of externalities, but in general, these are less than the actual value produced by that sector, with the exception of food producers. From the data they collected I think in 2010, they found that the cost of environmental damage caused by 11 key industry sectors was equivalent to 41% of their pre-tax profits. And some sectors, such as food producers, would have no profits left if they had to pay for the full cost of their negative environmental externalities and took no mitigating actions. So that's really exceptional. That's where the cost, the blue line, is higher than the orange line. And for food producers, that's the one sector where that's really the case. So while the environmental costs of the huge quantities, say, of nitrogen running off from the corn and soy fields of the Midwest, creating vast oxygen depleted zones in the Gulf of Mexico, or of rainforests, clearing in Indonesia to feed the demands of people in the palm oil processed food are fairly well known, there's now also a growing recognition that among the costs we need to count are the costs to health. Agriculture and food systems have a broad diversity of impacts on human health. My colleague Nadia Shialaba had worked on this sort of beginning inventory of the possible health costs across the food system. And this is going from the far right, which would be the costs which occur to health in the field, going across to the left to the cost to consumers. And it's quite an inventory. And I do think as we talk about the true costs of our production system, that health is the area that is going to make a lot of people really, really stand up and pay attention. But food supply chains do not only produce food and negative costs. And I don't want to be so negative in this picture because I don't believe it. I really believe that there's a largely hidden aspect that food supply chains can generate many positive benefits for health, for communities, and for the planet. For example, smallholder farmers of both cocoa and coffee in the tropics carefully manage a very diverse tree overstory, protecting soils and maintaining biodiversity while tending their crops. That's just an example. But what is even less understood and undervalued is how supply chains might be reconfigured or redesigned to catalyze a wide range of positive economic, environmental, and social costs. So in this webinar, we want to paint an accurate picture of these hidden costs and perspectives from a number of different perspectives, and to suggest where we might work to build the circles in food systems to make them more responsive to local needs first, nimble in adapting to disruptions such as the current pandemic, and focused on delivering healthy food to all as a human right. That's my background and introduction to the topic of true cost accounting. Back to you, Robin.
Thank you. Sometimes I swear that mute button hides. Thank you very much. I think it was very helpful to have some contextualizing of what true cost accounting is. And I think folks would really like to hear from all of you, all of the panelists, about how do you understand true cost accounting, and why are we hearing more, but frankly not enough, about it? And I would like to hear from each one of you on this topic, and so maybe you could help people understand the kind of work that you're doing currently in true cost accounting. So the original question, how do you understand true cost accounting, and why are we hearing more but not enough about it? And if I could have you lead, Paula, that would be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think that what's happening and what I've seen is an evolution of an understanding of the systemic aspects of the food system is that's been increasing, I would say, over the last 20 years, with an acceleration over the last 10, thanks to works like Tim's book and others that I think a lot of us are familiar with. So getting into the pieces of how that system works, it tends to be an economic environment. I think most of you would agree. It does have its regulatory aspects, but if you look at other systems that provide a public good, like water and electricity, those are regulated environments, and so the structure of them is around regulating the delivery and the delivery of water to homes, because it's considered to be a public good and it's managed publicly. Energy is the same way, even though you have different producers of energy in the private sector. The delivery of energy comes through a utility system that's managed publicly. So that's very transparent and very open. But agriculture, by and large, is a private enterprise system. So as people are beginning to understand it and look at it, they're also beginning to think of how do you start making these shifts in the system to bring it in line with what public values really are. And we're seeing more of that during this COVID crisis. I mean, we're characterizing essential, farm and grocery retail workers as essential, and beginning to see the public good that they provide. So in that context comes this idea that Barbara's correct. It's kind of an odd name, but let's go with it. It's where it is, true cost accounting. But at least thinking about transparency in the system, and then leveling the playing field, where we know something's important, like how do we invest as a public in making sure these things are leveled out. So in some ways it shows up in efforts like putting a tax on sugar sweetened beverages. So that's understanding the negative externalities of health impacts of having too much sugary beverages and too available to so many people. So those places, mostly municipalities in the United States that have implemented a sugar tax, are operating under a principle of trying to, level that playing field and create that imposition on that tax to kind of, on that product to account for its negative externalities. And you see that coming up in, there was a proposal for a fertilizer tax in California that would account then, compensate for the negative externalities of water pollution. And I teach a class at UCLA in food systems, and some of my students have proposed a carbon tax on meat. So you see it expressing itself in those ways, but I would say that taxes are a blunt instrument. I'm sure that the economists among us could think of other types of incentives. And there are the positive incentives too. So an example in the health category and the community-facing category in food access is what a lot of us know of as the market match program, or double up bucks, or veggie voucher, or whatever it's called in your municipality. But it was a line item in the Farm Bill, a program in the Farm Bill, to provide extra dollars to buy produce at farmers markets. So that's, you could call that a program that's dealing with that issue of access to food. But we are looking at, in my own work, the Good Food Purchasing Program. I see many of the panelists on the call might be familiar with it, but just to quickly describe it, we have an evaluation and feedback program for purchasers of food that are at large institutions. So we rate their purchasing, and we get their food purchasing information down to the dollar, down to the farm level, and we reflect back to them how they're doing in the categories that we have developed on environmental sustainability, fair labor, animal welfare, local economies, and nutritional health. And we tell them how they're doing. So many of them have been trying to do better in the categories according to the rubric we framed, but it's very hard for them to afford the more environmentally sustainable products. They're able to do more in local economies, but environmental sustainability, more of a challenge, as an example. So one of the things we're looking at is, can we create an incentive package through partnership with local or state government to give them extra funding for them to purchase food that falls into all 5 categories. And some states have done this with their incentives for local food purchasing. Michigan has one, New York, Oregon, that provide incentives for purchasing local food to institutions. So those are the ways that we're interacting with this concept of recognizing the externalities and then bringing a policy idea in to address it.
Thank you. So, Tim, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to your understanding of true cost accounting and why you think we're hearing more about it, and then Paula even spoke to your work and your writings on true cost accounting. So we'd love to hear more about what your research encompasses.
Sure. No, it's a pleasure to be here, and I think it's an interesting mix of panelists here. I've appreciated the food purchasing program because it's, I think, going beyond a lot of what other programs are doing in terms of trying to, it's sort of going beyond trying to actually set values. That's what the true cost accounting image is that you're actually trying to put prices on everything. And I think they recognize that there's an evaluative piece of it that's not just about accounting, right? It's about identifying our values and making sure that our systems are supporting our values. And that's kind of how I understand and I really benefited from the concept, is that it's really identifying and valuing uncounted costs and benefits that fall outside of economic activity and pricing for a whole variety of different reasons. But doing so, trying to do so without falling into the sort of, I would call it the neoliberal trap of trying to commodify everything, to put a price on everything, which is one of the dangers of it. It's one of the one of the pushbacks that I get about that. That is, to try to avoid confusing costs and prices with values, because values are, of course, our values, not just what you can put a price on. My colleague, Frank Ackerman from Tufts, who sadly died last year, was a real leader in that kind of thinking. He has a book called Priceless, and the subtitle is On Knowing the Price of Everything and the Value of Nothing. And he goes into a lot of the different ways that the most naked forms of cost-benefit analysis can actually take us down the wrong path. So I think the ways that I've seen true cost accounting, like the TEAM project and others, implement it, is a much more expansive and useful tool. In my own work, I mean, I guess one other thing I'd say about Frank's work is that, you know, his book is intended to remind us that he called it priceless because there are things that are truly priceless, right? It's like, what's the value of the existence of the right whale? There's anyone who tries to put any price on that is kidding us all, right? And so how do we incorporate those values too into our economic activities and calculations? In my work, one of the ways that I've approached this is that it also tends, the field tends to get dominated by environmental accounting, trying to account for environmental impacts. But as the food purchasing program shows, it's also about social elements. And our work has actually looked at economically what we call the implicit subsidies to industrial livestock production that comes not, I mean, there are a lot of them. Some of them are environmental. Some of them are economic and the result of government farm policy. And it's not the subsidies, it's that we massively overproduce the commodities that industrial livestock uses as its main input, as its main raw material, feed, corn and soybeans. 60% of the costs of a hog farm are feed. And so if feed grains are undervalued, are underpriced, then livestock is dramatically underpriced. We did a set of calculations about the extent to which US farm policies have encouraged overproduction and resulted in feed costs being below the actual costs of producing the feed. Not narrowly because of subsidies. Studies show you take the subsidies away, you'd still have overproduction of these things. You need policies to control production. But we did a set of estimates that showed that industrial livestock firms saved $35 billion in feed costs over 9 years from feed costs that were below the cost of production. So farmers are losing from that, right? Because they're not getting full cost of production for their feed. And the land and environment are losing from that because we're massively overproducing. So more land is in corn and soybeans than should be. And the net result of that is a huge discount, 10 to 15% on for Smithfield and Tyson and the biggest meat producers in their concentrated animal feeding operations, their factory farms. Just to illustrate how that helps us understand economic transitions and environmental impacts, if you that put diversified family farmers who were growing their own grain, right? That's the way people used to do it. You'd grow your own feed, you'd grow corn and soybeans on your farm and feed it to your animals. People who were doing that were losing. They weren't getting that discount, right? So the people who get the discount are the big guys, and everybody loses, except possibly cheap meat at the other end. And cheap meat is arguably not a good. It's an environmental cost and something that a lot of us have been talking about being far too, again, very interesting work being done on the extent to which our meat problem in climate, in terms of climate change, it's treated as a demand problem that we just all need to try and find a way to cut the consumption of meat. But there's interesting work being done on how to truly account for the cost of meat so that it's not so cheap, so that it is, and that an important element of changing that dynamic of overconsumption of meat is going to be raising the price of meat by having true cost accounting, force meat producers to incorporate not just greenhouse gas emissions and carbon emissions, but pay full price for their feed. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. So Barbara.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that, please go ahead.
Yeah. So my relationship with true cost accounting comes from being an advocate of more ecological approaches in agriculture, something that I was leading when I was at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, or really before that, because I have been working as a pollination ecologist for many decades. And pollination is one of those classic benefits of nature very graciously providing this service to people, but that we've never valued it now until we're about to lose it. A good lesson in really valuing those benefits of nature. So when I was at FAO, the TEEB initiative, we've spoken of this and I might leave some references to it. This is the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity for Agriculture and Food. It was underway, led by another sister organization, the United Nations Environment Program. And they invited us at FAO to take a deep dive into the positive and negative externalities of rice farming systems around the world. And as an ecologist, I was absolutely amazed this is where I really want to reinforce that there's the negative externalities, but there's positive externalities as well. The incredible ecosystem that a rice field can be. If it's not treated with pesticides and other agricultural chemicals, it's capable of generating its own natural pest control. As spiders flourish in the rice leaves and eat the pests as they start to emerge. Being with all the water in the field, it attracts many, many organisms which ultimately die in the water and create its own natural fertility. The biodiversity in rice paddies can be from fish to frogs to ducks to dragonflies. It can be, under these conditions, it can be richer than that of nearby ponds, extremely high biodiversity. And maybe I illustrate this a little bit with my slides because I think it's, just a moment. I think there's a very strong argument to be made that agriculture need not be the enemy of biodiversity. These rice terraces that characterize upland rice farming systems throughout the world are the outcomes of farmers that are working with nature, not against nature with the tractor. They're often mountainous areas that could otherwise not sustainably produce crops. And in the act of growing rice, it remains very labor intensive, built by communities, generations of farmers that sculpt the land and preserve water and soil. Water supply, the most important aspect of rice terraces, comes from rivers and mountain streams. Irrigation flows through the same complex canals and riverways that are centuries old in many, many rice growing areas of the world. The different levels of a rice terrace allow water to flow successively down each level and an important form of flood control in the monsoon season. I did further work then on an extension of the rice study to work with colleagues in Senegal in particular, to look at all along the rice food value chain and explore the impact of different policies. And here we made two comparisons. I went the wrong way here. Yeah, two comparisons of business as usual. Government investment in Senegal, which is underway and is further proposed to build large-scale irrigation schemes and large-scale concentrated agro-processing zones versus a more agroecological approach. Foregoing such loans and their very heavy interest obligations to the government, and investing instead in farmer-to-farmer training on ecological rice production and in smaller community-owned mills where rice products, for example, can be recycled to animal feed. We looked at this through a systems model, and the somewhat not entirely intuitive outcomes were that the agroecological alternative had impacts that could be far-reaching, ones you wouldn't immediately expect. But for example, on women's empowerment through greater employment of local mills, youth employment, small-scale industries to support mechanization. Once the government funds to make large interest payments are freed up, even smaller investments in these areas can have really profound impacts. And this is not limited to rice alone. Farming systems that are managed ecologically and equitably are eminently capable of supporting both people, their needs for food, and biodiversity. Again, I think the title of True Cost Accounting is a bit unfortunate because the aim is not to count beans. It's to bring out these largely hidden relationships of how our production systems have both negative effects, but are capable of strongly positive impacts. So I hand that back to you, Robin. I'll stop share.
Yeah, thank you. So all of you mentioned externalities in your, when you were talking about your own work in True Cost Accounting, kind of what that is, some positive and some negative. So What are some of the important externalities? And for those less familiar with the terminology, that's those costs or benefits in our food system that in your estimation are more hidden, that society could benefit if we recognized and explicitly valued these more so. So maybe Tim, if I could send this to you first.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, it's a perfect follow-on to Barbara's Barbara's comments. I mean, I was gonna suggest that one of those hidden hidden positive externalities is certainly agricultural biodiversity, and it's striking because in economic terms, it's very difficult to find a way in which it's ever granted value, in which biodiverse farming actually is given a higher price for its quality. You get occasions where you get shade-grown coffee, biodiverse shade-grown coffee. You get specialty markets, niche markets like that, which is great. And some of those market initiatives, fair trade in particular, have really done a lot to find a way to use the market to revalue and certification and standard setting to revalue those practices. But you hit these large commodity chains, and it's much more complicated to think about doing that. And so some of my work has looked at maize and corn markets in the United States and Mexico, and looked at the ways in which not just that we just sort of it's the bringing into competition of a system dominated by negative externalities with systems filled with positive externalities through the process of free trade. It's something that economist Jim Boyce from the University of Massachusetts called the globalization of market failure. He said you globalize markets, but markets fail. Markets have failures. Neoclassical economics recognizes the existence of market failures, a market failure being a case in which the full costs of something are not actually reflected in its price. Environment, obviously, is one of the main areas that takes place. So with free trade between the US and Mexico, we looked at the extent to which US corn, I mean, it flowed into Mexico. US exports increased 400% after NAFTA. They were going into Mexico at 19% below their cost of production. Producer prices in Mexico went down 66% as a result of that opening of the economy to US corn. US corn, which is dramatically underpriced, right? Underpriced for all the reasons that we've talked about, overproduced, and then underpriced because of environmental externalities. Globalization brings that corn into direct competition with biodiverse native Mexican corn production. Mexico being the birthplace of corn, the site of its greatest agricultural biodiversity, widely recognized as of enormous value for society as a whole, and for commercial crop breeders, for that matter. That's where they get their germplasm, is from a lot of those kinds of the evolution over many, many years of those varieties of corn. They did a recent survey in Mexico, actually 3 years ago now, and identified more than 21,000 different varieties of maize in the country. So globalization brings US corn flowing across the border, and they all meet in the big bad marketplace, and that biodiversity has virtually no value in the market. The native Mexican corn, there's lots of efforts to try to create niche markets, to create buying programs. There are efforts right now. The new government in Mexico is making I think a pretty interesting effort. We'll see how effective it is for public purchasing at supported prices of native corn, which would be a a game changer for a lot of the indigenous communities that still grow a lot of that corn. But short of that, under NAFTA, when their government was absolutely hostile to those small-scale indigenous producers, you essentially had the globalization of market failure, a market failure to recognize the value of biodiverse Mexican corn, and to not recognize the actual costs of U.S. corn. Underpriced U.S. corn comes into direct competition with undervalued Mexican corn, and the loser is, I argued, the loss is greater than the sum of those two parts. It reinforces production in cheap U.S. corn gets a bigger market share. Biodiverse Mexican corn gets pushed down even further, so that the effects can be way worse than they would have been without the opening up of that global trade without regulation.
Thank you, Tim. It's never easy, right? A direct answer, because it's you can have a positive benefit in the form of the certification schemes valuing biodiversity, but then also have that be considered a negative externality also. Paula, I'd be curious to hear, your thoughts about what you think some of the other important externalities are in the food system that are hidden from most.
Yeah, I'll mention that, but I want to build a little bit on what we've talked about in terms of externalities, and a question that I'm seeing from someone about how are we characterizing true cost accounting versus true cost of food. Please. And in some ways it ties in together. So if you think of it as the cost of food right now, what we're talking about is accounting for the externalities, and we've been using that term, but the things that the cost of the food doesn't bear. As Tim was pointing out, meat is a good example, because you can buy very cheap hamburger right now. And this is a famous example. Michael Pollan has referred to it a lot, but it's worth bringing up right now, that meat is still very cheap, but we're learning in this COVID time that it's cheap because it's been consolidated. There's efficiencies of scale, so it's highly consolidated. And what's lost in terms of that efficiency is the impacts on the environment, right, that Tim has pointed out. So it's cheap and it's available, but the externalities are outside of it. But if you look at something that is more expensive, right, so the cost of that food's more expensive. So for example, an apple, an apple might cost the same as a hamburger, but an apple, you could say, is true costed. It's because there aren't the subsidies that created this, that help the farmer produce the apple with that subsidies that make it cheaper. So it's more at its true cost. Fish, I would argue, is by and large at its true cost. So you would pay more per pound of fish than you were per pound of meat. And what you're seeing in that is the shorter supply chain. You're seeing a more direct relationship, and you're seeing less subsidies that keep the costs low. And a lot of that was designed in the mid 20th century. So this is why I think we're beginning to see the impacts of it now. So organic is an example for me of a more true costed food. You pay more for it, but what's happened is then the impacts on the environment that would come from pesticide use or the other types of things that the organic seal manages for are then embedded in the cost of the food. So when you pay more for it, you're paying more of a true cost from an environmental standpoint. But something that's not easily accounted for now that's an externality is labor. So even fish, being more true costed, because you pay a little bit more for fish, but it's taking more into account of what it took to produce and bring it to us. A lot of labor in the fish processing area is still very economically depressed. I mean, there's a lot of reports on slave labor in fish. So the piece that is most difficult to manage for are labor costs. The fact that the labor in terms of processing and production is not paid well, or not paid minimum wage, is what keeps that cost of food down. So to me, this also ties in with this question that I saw from Amanda on the food commons and how that relates to this concept. A lot to be sorted out there, but some of you have mentioned Jose Luis Vivera Pol, who does have some leading work on this issue. So I think the jury's, I just want to raise it as something for you all to consider, because it's still a concept that needs to be explored a lot from different angles. But he raises the point of also having farm workers be on the payroll of governments, so that they're not subject to the free market, so that it's a recognition of the public good of food and the essential service that farm workers have. So he's made a point that farm workers should be government employees, and therefore they would get fair wages. They would also get benefits, health benefits, etc. What would that do to the cost of food? If it's a public good and it's recognized that way, maybe it could be managed without the cost being higher, but it would be a public investment in that aspect of the food production.
Thank you. Barbara?
Yeah, shall I carry on from here?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so yeah, so we're talking about costs, but also benefits. And so I do want to stress the benefit side. A benefit that I have that I think is vastly underappreciated and undervalued is the knowledge and understanding of farmers, both the small scale farmers around the world who work with nature and the growing cadre of farmers in more developed countries that are explicitly choosing to follow ecological approaches. And farmers are always inherently experimenting and working with context-specific solutions, continuously adapting their knowledge to meet new situations, weather conditions, markets. And yet researchers, and I am one, have consistently overlooked this basis of knowledge and largely around the world invested in or hoped for some kind of silver bullet solutions, technologies developed in a lab that they think farmers should adopt because it's science. But I'd suggest that the solution to many of these farming challenges and a huge benefit that exists is right under our feet. Why not ask the farmer and work with the farmer in their given conditions, and let individual farmer experimentation become something that is shared, a kind of common pool of knowledge, the mistakes as well as the successes. And I will just give an example. When people talk of making farming more sustainable, one of the main tools is cover crops, planting a specific crop for the benefit of the soil, often clovers or mixes of clover and grasses. It's talked about a lot, but it's not easy to implement, and it is not applied the amount of use is actually pretty small. So we realized in this small rural valley where I live in California that we have a number of farmers that have been experimenting with different mixes of cover crops for quite a long time. And they've learned a lot from it, but they've learned a lot about, but they don't always know why something has worked necessarily. And it's a knowledge that stays with them themselves. So together we decided to kind of develop a project on crowdsourcing cover crops and develop a modality where farmers could share their information with each other and interact with researchers who could help them understand some of the why questions. And we submitted this little proposal to the Organic Farming Research Foundation, and it was turned down because it was not scientific enough. So our farmers had some real strong reactions to that. They really would like help from researchers, but they'd like the research to address their questions. I would say we have resubmitted it now to the Western Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, and it will be funded starting in the fall. So there's hope for that, but I just think it's, I don't think you can say that farmers are not scientific. They are constantly experimenting. And I would see a real tremendous benefit of this idea of co-creation of knowledge, beginning with the people closest to the ground and extending to building what are called farmer researcher networks. It should be valued and invested in. And that could take many different forms of kind of innovation platforms that foster co-learning, support for horizontal dissemination of experience between farmers. I know that in every farming community where I've worked around the world, you will always find these extraordinary and innovative individuals who connect with nature through their farming. And these are the lighthouses, the treasures that we need to value and support, and to work with them on sharing their knowledge. Okay.
Thank you, Barbara. I think, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the next question to you first then, Barbara. So where do you think government could make strategic investments that reduce social costs of our food system and build the benefits?
Okay, so I'm getting very interested in these questions of infrastructure and employment as two hot button issues of huge importance right now, but ones that those of us who are advocating for an alternative agriculture don't usually address. Paula, I think, is very knowledgeable about the need for infrastructure investment to build sustainable local food chains. And she has a lot of, she might bring this up, she has a lot of good thoughts on that. So I leave that to her, except that I would strongly advocate, and I think it's come up a bit in the chats, about viewing infrastructure to get locally produced nutritious food equitably distributed should be considered a public good along the lines of roads, waters, sanitation, rural electrification. That's a concept I think considering it a common good is really has a tremendous value. Speaking of the issue of employment, and obviously this is on everyone's minds right now, I found so interesting the work of a colleague of mine, Lucas Garibaldi in Argentina, who is just a wonderful character who absolutely loves to crunch numbers, and he's very good at it. So he has looked at, he loves to kind of get into these FAO global databases and see what he can pull out of them. And he has done so. I'm going to again share my screen with one last slide. Just a moment.
It's funny, we can see the screen, but not Barbara.
Can you see? Okay.
It's her proxy.
So he analyzes global data and finds that when countries have a high crop diversity, and Tim has spoken quite a bit about the importance of diversity and crop diversity, countries that have a high crop diversity support more agricultural employment, and they do not sacrifice their socioeconomic development or economic growth. So this isn't something just the purview of small, very poor countries. It's a global phenomenon. And closer to home, there's been other work that has shown that in California and Washington, organic farms employ more workers per acre than on average, from 2 to 12% more, and a higher proportion of workers were employed for more days, suggesting more stable employment for farm workers. So higher crop diversity and more ecological approaches to farming, I think it can be argued that it really requires a more diverse set of inputs, logistics, machinery, skills, and services throughout the year, creating more employment niches. Crops can have different processing and commercialization channels. Landscapes with higher crop diversity also provide more resources for other rural economic activities such as beekeeping or tourism, providing a greater number of jobs in rural areas and jobs all along the food value chain. So in terms of government investment, I would promote training of a new ecologically skilled workforce, extension agents and entrepreneurs who are ready to listen to farmers, consumers, and to nature and build more livelihoods upon this. That's my contribution.
Barbara, I want to join in asking, what's the source again? This is a great slide.
This is Garibaldi and Mendez, and I'll put the citation in the chat.
Great, thank you.
So on to, who was the next?
Yeah, I think Barbara queued you up, Paula.
Okay.
Infrastructure.
Well, okay. Yeah, I mean, what I've noticed to be incredibly valuable, particularly in this time of the COVID crisis, where we've had entire food supply chains disrupted, food service shut down, and their food supply chains tend to be more diverse, by and large. Food service is a very big category, but if it includes, to the extent it includes restaurants and the restaurants that preference local food that's well raised, all those supply chains were shut down. But the ones that had intermediaries, like a food hub, that were sourcing from small local farmers and selling to restaurants or even school districts, some large food service institutions. So that intermediary function seems to be very critical infrastructure, and on land-based food as well as seafood. I was speaking this morning with Bren Smith, who's the founder of Greenwave. He's an oyster farmer, oyster and kelp farmer in Connecticut, and he has an intermediary function. He aggregates and serves as an intermediary between the oyster farmers and different markets. So that's a shorter intermediary chain, if that makes sense. Somebody who works directly with the farmers, but then also directly with the institutions, provides technical assistance, communication support, marketing support, all of that. And then distribution and logistics as well. Another good example is the Common Market that is out of Philadelphia, but they were able to pivot and support emergency feeding in New York. They had those direct relationships with the institutions as well as the local farmers. So very short, like one intermediary. So not like in the very large scale global meat being another good example. There's a lot of intermediaries, but it all funnels up into 4 or 6 multinational companies, right? So the more distributed you have that intermediary function, the more you have a really strong ecosystem for that kind of intermediary function within a region, I think the better. I actually have a blog that was published this morning that I can share with you that has my views on should I put it in the chat box? I'm putting the link in right now.
Yeah, yes, please, because there was actually even a question from that, is right on topic. So what would you say are the key 3 to 5 infrastructure investments that would build a strong regional sustainable supply?
Yeah, it's right there in that post. But I just put it in.
1 or 2.
Well, one of them was, I think there should be this investment in the food hub, and I say that as a deliberate piece of infrastructure. It's just, from what I've seen, it's a thing that really makes it all work really well. It is, most of them are philanthropically supported. I think this is a place where government could be involved. There are grants for this type of thing. So the USDA has grants, New York has given grants. There are definitely a lot of places where there are grants. Actually, we have somebody on the line, on the panel too, named Sabella Kraus, who's done a lot of good study on this. If I happened to, Sabella, I'm gonna ask you to put if you want to share your study, because she's looked at what it could do for the Bay Area, what sort of infrastructure you'd need, economic infrastructure to really support it, a local food economy. And by local, we mean that area of your food shed area. So in Los Angeles, it could be a 200-mile radius from Los Angeles. In New England, it might be a multi-state region. You'd have to characterize your own food shed. And Sabella's work pointed that out. If she doesn't do it, I'm going to find it and present it.
I hope she does.
Yeah. So for me, what I think are the things that could work are to have some aggregate. Yeah, so Sabella just posted it. Hi, Sabella. Is to have aggregate purchasing requirements from a region, back that up, with public investments in a food hub infrastructure and the other economic development infrastructure that would support it. I think those are pretty key elements. And the food hubs could there be some kind of continuous stream of funding to keep them going over time? So could there be an assessment district, a bond, something that would support having them be able to continue operations while they're providing these services that are relationship driven and aren't always economically supported by the price of the food? That's my thought.
Yeah, thank you. I want to just take one quick moment to acknowledge those of you who had the 1 hour lunch hour and need to be going. Please know that the panelists have graciously agreed to stay on to address the questions that have already been asked. So thank you very much to all of you for doing that. But to the rest of you, if you asked a question and we weren't able to get it answered within the 1 hour time slot, please know that the recording will be shared with you. Emailed directly to you in your inbox. So we hope that you'll be able to listen back into these last 5-10 minutes or so. So thank you for those of you who could join, but we're all staying here. So I'm going to look to Tim next. So Tim, I'm curious what your thoughts are about where you think the government could be making strategic investments. Yeah,
no, thanks. No, really interesting comments. I guess, as I'm thinking about this, because my work is mainly on global agricultural markets, I sort of think of it, and actually also on U.S. National agricultural policies. I sort of come at it, I'd come at it from that direction. I think the COVID crisis certainly highlights the dangers of concentrated, long supply chains, right? That's what we'd all say. To oversimplify the answer, diversity is the answer. Diversity in terms of more diverse suppliers, local supplies, etc. The thing that I've focused on a lot in my work is that the market basically will not deliver that. And it won't deliver that even if the US eliminates subsidies. It'll deliver it for some products, for some markets, but it won't deliver it at a national level. And so you look at those commodified crops, the corn, soy, wheat, rice. You need policies that are going to better regulate those markets. And we used to have them. It used to be called parity pricing. It used to be called supply management. It was outlawed in the 1996 Farm Bill. Ironically, it's coming back. It comes back now because the Commodity Credit Corporation is the body in the federal government under the Farm Bill that has purchasing authority to purchase and distribute crops, and that's the authority being used by President Trump to offer to buy up excess pork and to distribute it to food banks, buy up excess dairy. The thing is, that used to be a central feature of U.S. agricultural policies coming out of the Great Depression, and it could be again, and it should be again. And the reason it should be again is that it to deregulate agricultural production in the ways that we have ensures that we're going to overproduce and prices are going to be below the cost of production and farmers will lose and we'll get bad, cheap food, just like we've gotten. To have the government recognize that it needs to regulate those markets. It needs to actually take land out of these commodity crops, and nothing could be better for the environment than taking land out of these commodity crops. There's a great journalist who some of you may have come across named Art Cullen out of Storm Lake, Iowa. He won a Pulitzer for uncovering a secret fund created by agribusiness to try to defeat water regulations in Iowa. He says he's the smallest circulation publication ever to win a Pulitzer. He's a really interesting guy, but he says, look, right now Iowa is growing about 30% more corn and soybeans than anyone needs. The market is telling you we're growing more than we need. There need to be incentives to take land out of corn and soybeans, and putting them into grasslands would be the best thing you could do for the environment. Giving farmers back diversified farms where they had animals on the farm, like beef cattle grazing that grassland, would be an environmental benefit. Reducing the amount of corn and soybeans we produce would be a tremendous benefit because it would boost the price of corn and soybeans for those farmers. It would boost the price that Smithfield has to pay for its feed. So meat would be a little less artificially cheap as a result of those policies. It would be undeniably bad for agribusiness, which is why it doesn't happen. Does Smithfield want to pay more for its feed? No. Does Monsanto want to see its seed sales cut because less land is being planted in corn and soybeans? No. And that's why it doesn't happen. But there's a real opportunity in this crisis to put that kind of measure back on the table. And one of the ways that connects at a national level to what Paul is talking about, we used to have grain reserves. We used to have national food reserves because the way the government can regulate supply and demand in the U.S. economy in agriculture is by being the buyer of last resort, guaranteeing a minimum price that is profitable to the farmer. And if the market doesn't deliver it, the government buys it up. That puts the government in a tremendously powerful position to respond to crises. Those can be crises of underproduction, and therefore their prices have surged. They can bring prices down by releasing food from the stocks, or from the opposite, in which case they can buy up excess and deliver it where no one has the money to pay for it, be that a food bank or what have you. It's a little bit back on the table. It should be more back on the table, and it would take a dramatic rewriting of the Farm Bill to put the government back in that kind of a position to do it. But I think it's really worth thinking about.
You know, can I just jump in on that? Because I wonder if those are federal policies, but I wonder if something like that could happen on a state level too. You know, if the states were to engage more in food thinking, because we've left it for so long to the federal government to shape our food and agriculture policy, but maybe it's time for the states to step up because they have a sense of what's happening in their region.
I mean, what's tricky about that, Paula, is that and it's already tricky for the US to do it, because what everybody says is, oh, you can't do that. We'll just get cheaper corn and soybeans from Brazil. The buyers will import. Smithfield will start importing its corn and soybeans from Brazil.
True.
So it's a much more complicated thing. And at a state level, if you could go across state lines and buy your cheap commodities where they're not supporting them, it becomes complicated. But
yeah, I was thinking mostly of your government purchase, emergency purchase concept. Like maybe that could be deployed at a state or local level. And then there's also, in Iowa, for example, there's the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust that works to take land, continue to have it be working lands, but have more diversified, environmentally sound production methods. You know, so those land trusts and those types of efforts are really worth supporting. And maybe there could be more funding for that as well.
And I would add that, I mean, I do actually have more hope on more localized levels or state levels for some of these progressive policies to come forward, at least right now. And the state of California with the Healthy Soils Initiative, that's one good example of investing in ecosystem services. And it's not taking the land out of production, but it's working on its ability to generate positive ecosystem services. I think there's similar policies certainly Vermont has done some really interesting things in promoting composting. Yeah, so I think we need to look on the closer levels rather than the national level for the time being, at least.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, Barbara. I think I focus on the national level because I think, you know, in all of the discussions of a Green New Deal and how agriculture will fit into that, it's very interesting, much needed discussion. What tends to get left out is the need to get land out of commodity crop production. It's the worst thing we're doing to our environment. It's not just getting people to do it better. They can definitely do it better. They can less tillage, more cover cropping, all of that. But in a way, just asking farmers to do that is a little bit papering over. And when you talk about the vast acreage of commodity cropping in the Midwest, for example, is just papering over the problem. You got to get some of that land out of production or that water is going to just be trashed, and the dead zone in the Mississippi, in the Gulf, is just going to keep growing year after year.
Yeah.
So there are some opportunities, right? So we're optimists here, right? And we're looking for what we need to be doing moving forward for more sustainable food systems. So there's opportunities at the local level, at the regional level, state level, and also national level. So I do have a few questions from our audience that promised, and most of the folks that have stayed with us because the discussion has been so engaging. One of the questions is this, so this is coming from Anna F. How do we do true cost accounting when our value systems in market tend to wholly underappreciate the labor of people of color, women, and people in the global South? It's a two-part question. Doesn't this require a fundamental rethinking of our value systems? And what does this mean for global supply chains? So I'll put it back in the chat so that it shows up so you all can see it, because it's a two-parter. Would somebody like to take on the first part of that? You know, how do we do true cost accounting when our value systems and market tend to underappreciate labor, and then labor of people of color, women, and people of the global South?
So I would just give a quick answer, perhaps, and I'd love to hear what Paula and Tim would think, but Paula and I are together we're co-editing a book on true cost accounting that will come out toward the end of this year. And there's a bit of a dialogue within the book, I think will come out more in who could lead in this idea. We need some brave institutions to really carry out this analysis on true cost accounting and say that those are the values and this needs to be respected. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I know that the dialogue is a little bit between, is it government or is it the private sector? And there are some private sector institutions that are really exploring true cost accounting, and they want to go through that value chain and really put those values on the labor and the equity issues that are not addressed. It's a small number, but I think there are some good companies. So we're still waiting to see governments weigh in, but Paula's in support of the government side.
Well, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Paula.
So in our good food purchasing program that I mentioned, so when our school district or a similar organization, you know, a municipal agency, rec and parks, hospitals, when they enroll in our program and agree to be evaluated, what they're agreeing to be evaluated against is our framework, which includes points. You know, if they agree to do a baseline of 15%. I'm getting to the answer to the question as I explain this. And then they agree, you know, that there's certain ways that we've assigned points in our system. And we do assign points. They can get extra points, right? If they contract or buy food from disadvantaged communities, you know, so people of color, women-owned farms, that sort of thing. So if they show that they're purchasing food, so keeping them economically viable, then we'll award them points. So points, it seems like a reductive way to manage it, but it basically is a feedback tool, as I mentioned. So it gives them feedback. It says, yes, thank you. You're identifying this as a value and you're gonna adopt it as a value, and they start providing that economic support for that entity. And we keep watching it, you know, so we keep every year, we let them know how they're doing and we have conversations with them about it. So that's our strategy, is to use the purchasing power of public institutions. It is public money being used for public good. So that's one, but that's why we also feel like that intermediary function is going to be really important to back up the ability to keep that going economically.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd add to that, it's really worth remembering, and I'm surprised how few people do, that President Obama came in 2008 with a promise to reform US labor laws and US immigration law, and neither one of them happened for a whole variety of complicated reasons. I think, again, one of the things we're seeing and perhaps appreciating in a greater way in the COVID crisis is who the essential workers are. I mean, literally who they are. People are seeing faces in a way that they haven't seen faces, and they're seeing what counts as essential all over again. Nothing could be more justified than a labor law reform and an immigration reform that legalizes a lot of those workers and makes it far easier for them to defend themselves against the kind of corporate abuses we've seen in the meat industry. And I would love someone in some future presidential debate to ask Joe Biden if where that sits on his priority list. It was a top level promise of Obama coming in, and he just wasn't able to deliver it, again, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, some could argue, I mean, there's a number of market mechanisms. So there's ours, and then there's also the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. It's a market-based mechanism that addresses that. But that, as Tim was saying, if you weave in Luis Rivera Pohl's concept, you know, of putting them on the payroll, or at least providing them benefits, and changing the laws, that starts getting at it too.
Yeah.
Well, as a program, you know, here and in general, food systems work tends to be a little more applied, right? There's calls to action. If we're concerned about food system sustainability, then somebody ought to do something about that. So I think, Tim, you just gave out a call to action. You know? So hopefully we can have somebody who's listening in today participating in the presidential debates. But I wanted to thank all of you for all of the other very specific ideas and suggestions, and hopefully there's some of these that can get onto the agenda of many of the participants that came today. So thank you to all of you who spent your time with us today. And like I said, if you want an opportunity to re-listen in, maybe have some time to access those resources. And then also all of the panelists have been very generous about sharing their contact information. You can, find them through their organizations if you have follow-up questions. And I want to thank you all, Tim, Paula, and Barbara, for taking your time today and talking about these concepts and these issues. So thank you so much. And this concludes the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So much.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.